Mrs. Rinder, surely you understand this boardroom is for shareholders only? That's what my former mother-in-law said to me when I walked into that conference room 6 months ago. The same woman who'd taken everything from me thought she could dismiss me one more time. She had no idea I owned 49% of everything she was sitting on. You know what's funny about people? They'll measure your worth by what they can see: your clothes, your address, the car you drive. They'll decide you're small because you choose to be quiet. They'll mistake your kindness for weakness, your grace for ignorance. And when they think you're down, when they're certain you have nothing left, that's when they show you exactly who they've always been. But here's what I've learned. The universe has a way of balancing the scales. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like. Sometimes we have to walk through fire to get to the other side. But when that balance comes, it's absolute. My name is Catherine Rinder, and before you ask, yes, this is one of those stories that sounds too good to be true. But I promise you, every word of what I'm about to tell you actually happened. This is the story of how I went from being a widow with nothing, no home, no money, no hope, to the woman who walked into a boardroom and dismantled an empire built on my husband's grave. This is about the $200 million no one knew I had, and the family that found out the hard way that you should never mistake silence for surrender. But before we get there, before I tell you about the look on their faces when they realized who I'd become, I need you to understand who I was. Because that matters. It matters that I believed in love. It matters that I trusted completely. It matters that when I was 24 years old, standing in a small church in my hometown, I actually thought marriage meant forever. How are you all doing today? I hope you're somewhere comfortable, maybe with some tea or coffee, because this story, it's going to take us on a journey. If you're watching from somewhere cold, I hope you're warm. If you're somewhere warm, I hope you've got that AC running. And wherever you are, whatever you're going through, I hope this story reminds you that your current chapter isn't your final one. Now, if you're the kind of person who loves a good redemption story, who believes that good people shouldn't finish last, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to stay down. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love knowing this story is reaching people everywhere. But let me start from the beginning, back when I still believed that being good was enough. I was 24 when I met Julian Rinder. Not Catherine Rinder yet, just Catherine Wells, a girl from a small town who'd moved to the city with a social work degree and dreams of making a difference. I worked at a community center in one of those neighborhoods that people with money drive through with their car doors locked. My job was to coordinate programs for at-risk youth, which is a fancy way of saying I tried to give kids a safe place to exist when the world felt dangerous. I remember the day Julian walked into my life like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was setting up chairs for our after-school tutoring program. He wasn't supposed to be there. Men in expensive suits didn't just wander into community centers in our part of town. But there he was, looking around like he'd stepped into a different world. "Can I help you?" I asked, probably not as politely as I should have. I was used to people treating our center like a photo opportunity: show up, take some pictures for their social media, then disappear back to their comfortable lives. He smiled, and it was genuine. I could tell the difference by then. "I hope so," he said. "I'm looking for someone who can tell me what this community actually needs, not what people think it needs." That got my attention. "Why?" "Because my company is looking to invest in community programs, and I'm tired of writing checks that don't actually change anything. I want to do something real." I was skeptical. I'd heard versions of this before. But Julian was different. He came back the next week. And the week after that. He didn't just write a check, he showed up. He sat with the kids. He listened when the grandmothers talked about what their neighborhood used to be. He asked questions that mattered. And somewhere between watching him help a ninth grader with algebra and seeing him laugh with the elderly men who played chess outside the center, I fell in love with him. It wasn't the kind of love you see in movies, all dramatic and sudden. It was quieter than that. It was realizing that he saw people the same way I did, as human beings with dignity and worth, not problems to be solved. It was discovering that underneath his expensive clothes and successful company, he was just a man who wanted his life to mean something. Julian told me about his family early on. The Rinders were old money, the kind of family that measured success in generations, not years. His father had built a commercial real estate empire that Julian had inherited and expanded. But Julian never seemed comfortable with the wealth. He wore it like an obligation, not a celebration. "My mother thinks I'm wasting my time here," he told me one evening as we locked up the center. "She doesn't understand why I'd want to work with people who can't benefit the company." "What do you tell her?" I asked. "That not everything is about benefit. That some things are about being human." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "That's what you taught me, Catherine. You remind me what matters." We got married 8 months later. Small ceremony, just like I wanted. Julian's family came, but I could feel their disapproval in every stiff smile and polite nod. His mother, Patricia Rinder, looked at me like I was a stain on her expensive furniture. His older brother, Dominic, barely acknowledged my existence. His sister-in-law, Vanessa, was the only one who spoke to me directly, and even then it felt performative. "You must be so overwhelmed," Vanessa said to me at the reception, her hand on my arm in a gesture that looked caring but felt condescending. "All of this must be so different from what you're used to." I smiled because I'd learned that sometimes a smile is the best shield. Love is love, no matter the setting. She laughed like I'd said something cute and naive. "Oh, honey, marriage is about so much more than love." I didn't understand what she meant then. I would later. Those first 3 years of marriage were the happiest of my life. Julian and I bought a house, nothing like the mansion he grew up in, but a real home with a yard and enough space to breathe. He continued running his company, and I continued my work at the community center. We talked about having children someday. We made plans that stretched years into the future. His family tolerated me, which I accepted as the best I could expect. We had dinner with them once a month, these formal affairs where I always felt like I was being tested on rules no one had explained to me. Patricia would ask pointed questions about my family, my background, my plans for contributing to the Rinder legacy. Dominic would talk about business deals and company growth like I wasn't sitting right there. Vanessa would compliment my dress in a tone that somehow made it sound like an insult. But Julian was my anchor. He'd hold my hand under the table during those dinners. He'd defend me when his mother's comments got too sharp. He'd remind me on the drive home that we were building our own life, our own family, and what his relatives thought didn't matter. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," he told me on our 3rd anniversary. We were in our living room, nothing fancy, just us and Chinese takeout and a movie we'd both seen a dozen times. "Everything good in my life started when I met you." I believed him. I believed in us. I believed that love could bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle, outlast any judgment. I was 27 years old, and I had no idea that in 6 months, everything I believed would be buried along with my husband. But there was something else I didn't know. Something that would change everything, though I wouldn't understand its importance until much later. When I was 19, still in college and working 3 jobs to afford it, I used to volunteer at a hospice center on weekends. Not because I had to, but because my grandmother had died in a hospice, and the kindness of the workers there had meant everything to our family. I wanted to give that back. There was a man there, older, always alone. No visitors, no family that I ever saw. His name was Richard Ashford, and the nurses said he'd been wealthy once, but had lost touch with everyone who mattered. He was dying slowly, and he was dying alone. I started spending time with him, reading to him when his eyes got too weak, talking to him about nothing and everything, listening to his stories about a life well lived and regrets that came too late to fix. I didn't do it for recognition or reward. I did it because he was a human being and no one should have to die alone. When he passed away a few months later, I went to his funeral. I was the only one there besides the priest and the funeral home staff. I cried for this man I'd known for such a short time, this stranger who'd somehow become important to me. I never knew he'd remembered me. Never knew he'd named me in his will. Never knew that the quiet, dying man I'd read poetry to was Richard Ashford, reclusive billionaire, founder of Ashford Industries, one of the wealthiest men in the country. His lawyers tried to contact me after his death, but I'd graduated and moved, changed addresses twice. The letters sat in their offices, waiting. The inheritance sat in accounts, untouched. $200 million that I had no idea existed. It would take 8 years, a husband's death, and losing everything for that letter to finally find me. But that's getting ahead of the story. At 27, I was just Catherine Rinder, happily married, working a job I loved, believing in a future that felt solid and certain. I didn't know that Julian's company was struggling. He never told me about the debt, the bad investments, the pressure from his family to make decisions he didn't agree with. He protected me from all of it, maybe too much. I didn't know that his mother had already decided I wasn't worthy of the Rinder name. That Dominic resented Julian for being their father's favorite. That Vanessa saw our life as something to acquire, not a brother-in-law to cherish. I didn't know that on a random Thursday in October, Julian would leave for a business trip and never come home. They said it was a heart attack. Sudden, unexpected, tragic. He was only 32 years old, and he died in a hotel room 3 states away alone. The call came at 2 in the morning. Patricia's voice on the other end, cold even in grief. "Catherine, there's been an accident. Julian is gone." Just like that. Gone. The funeral was a blur. I stood beside a casket holding the man I loved, surrounded by his family, and I never felt more alone. Patricia planned everything without asking me. Dominic gave a eulogy that made Julian sound like a stranger. Vanessa cried prettily for the cameras. And I stood there in a simple black dress, silent, because every word I tried to speak died in my throat. I thought that was the worst day of my life. I thought losing Julian was as bad as it could get. I had no idea the nightmare was just beginning. 3 days after we buried my husband, Dominic showed up at my door with a lawyer and documents I didn't understand. "We need to talk about Julian's estate," he said, walking past me into my home without invitation. "There are some complications you need to be aware of." That's when I learned that Julian's company, his assets, his entire estate, all of it was tied up in family trusts I'd never heard of. That's when they explained that as his widow, I had certain rights, but those rights were limited by agreements Julian had signed years before we met. That's when they started taking everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. We'll get to that part. We'll get to all of it. How they stripped me of every single thing my husband left behind. How they threw me out of my own home. How they made sure the world knew they considered me nothing. And we'll get to the moment when I walked back into their lives and showed them exactly who I really was. But you need to understand the before to appreciate the after. You need to know that I was kind before I learned to be strong. That I trusted before I learned to verify. That I believed the best in people before they showed me the worst. Because that's what this story is really about. It's not just about money or revenge or justice. It's about what happens when good people get pushed too far. It's about the moment when you decide that surviving isn't enough. You're going to reclaim everything they tried to take from you. So stay with me. This story gets dark before it gets light. It gets painful before it gets satisfying. But I promise you, it gets so satisfying. Because 6 months after they took everything, I walked into that boardroom. And when Patricia Rinder tried to dismiss me, when she said that the boardroom was for shareholders only, I smiled. I smiled the way she used to smile at me during those family dinners. That cold, superior smile that said I knew something she didn't. "You're absolutely right," I said, pulling out the chair at the head of the table. "This room is for shareholders only. Which is why I'm here." As of this morning, I own 49% of Rinder Holdings, which makes me not just a shareholder, Patricia. It makes me your partner, whether you like it or not. The silence in that room was absolute. But we'll get to that. First, you need to see how they destroyed me. Because you can't understand the victory without witnessing the devastation. Are you ready? This is going to be a journey. Let's talk about how my in-laws stole everything and how my secret $200 million inheritance changed everything. The week after Julian's funeral, I couldn't get out of bed. Not because I was physically unable to, but because the bed still smelled like him. His pillow still had the indent from his head. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand next to a book he'd never finish. Getting up meant accepting that he was really gone. So I stayed there in our bedroom, in our house, holding on to the last physical pieces of him I had left. Patricia called every day. At the time, I thought she was being kind. Checking on me. Making sure I was eating, sleeping, functioning. Her voice would come through the phone, smooth and controlled even in grief. Catherine, dear, have you thought about the arrangements we discussed? Catherine, we really need to go through Julian's office. Catherine, the lawyer needs to speak with you about some documents. I should have paid more attention to what she was actually saying. But grief makes you stupid. It makes you slow. It makes you miss things that should be obvious because your brain can only process so much pain at once. Let me tell you about my family because it explains why I didn't see what was coming. I grew up in a small town called Meadowbrook, about 3 hours from the city. My parents were teachers. My mom taught elementary school. My dad taught high school history. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. Enough for a safe home. Enough for food on the table, enough for love. My parents taught me that your worth wasn't measured in dollars. That kindness mattered more than success. That treating people with dignity was the highest calling. When I brought home straight A's, they were proud. But they were just as proud when I volunteered at the soup kitchen or helped Mrs. King next door with her groceries. Catherine, my dad used to say, the measure of a person is what they do when there's nothing in it for them. I believed him. I built my whole life around that principle. My mom died when I was 21. Cancer, fast and brutal. My dad followed 2 years later. The doctors said it was a stroke, but I knew better. He died of a broken heart. They'd been together since high school, and he simply couldn't figure out how to exist without her. So by the time I met Julian, I was alone in the world. No siblings, no cousins I was close to, no extended family that mattered. Just me and the community I'd built through my work. Maybe that's why I held on to Julian's family so tightly after he died. Maybe that's why I convinced myself that Patricia's daily calls were about concern rather than control. They were all I had left of him, and I needed to believe they cared about me, even a little bit. Vanessa came by the house 4 days after the funeral. She brought food that I didn't eat and sat with me in the living room while I stared at nothing. You poor thing, she said, and her voice sounded genuinely sympathetic. I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't know how to do this, I told her. It was the first real thing I'd said to anyone since Julian died. I don't know how to be a widow at 27. I don't know how to live in this house without him. I don't know anything anymore. She took my hand. Her nails were perfectly manicured, painted a soft pink. Mine were bare and ragged from anxious picking. You're not alone, Catherine. Your family. We're going to take care of you. I wanted so badly to believe her. Julian loved you so much, she continued. He talked about you all the time. About how you made him want to be better. How you reminded him what mattered. Did he? The question came out desperate. I needed to know that his family had seen what we had, that they understood how real it was. Of course. He was different with you. Happier. She paused, and something flickered across her face that I couldn't read. He would want you to be taken care of. That's what all these legal matters are about. Making sure you're secure. I don't care about money, I said. I just want him back. I know, sweetie. I know. She squeezed my hand. But Julian would want you to be practical. He'd want you to let the family handle the complicated things. That's what we're here for. Looking back, that was the first real warning sign. But I was drowning in grief, and she was throwing me what looked like a lifeline. Of course I grabbed it. Dominic came the next day with a lawyer named Gerald Fisk. Gerald was in his 60s, gray-haired and formal, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car. "Mrs. Rinder," he said, shaking my hand with the kind of sympathy that felt rehearsed. "Please accept my condolences. Julian was an exceptional man." "Thank you," I whispered. We sat at my dining room table, the one Julian and I had picked out together at an estate sale, the one we'd refinished ourselves over a weekend, laughing as we got more stain on ourselves than the wood. Dominic and Gerald sat across from me, documents spread between us like a barrier. "Catherine," Dominic began, and his voice was gentler than I'd ever heard it. "I know this is difficult timing, but there are some matters that can't wait. Julian's estate is complicated." "Complicated how?" Gerald opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "Your husband's assets are primarily tied up in the family business, Rinder Holdings. The company structure is complex, with various trusts and agreements that were established long before your marriage." "Okay," I said, trying to focus through the fog in my brain. "What does that mean for me?" "It means," Dominic said carefully, "that while you are Julian's widow, the business assets pass according to the terms of the family trust, not a standard inheritance. Julian's shares in the company revert to the trust, which is controlled by the family board." "But Julian told me I'd be taken care of. He said he'd made sure." "And you will be," Dominic interrupted. "We're not trying to cut you out, Catherine. We're trying to explain how things work. The company can't just be split up or sold off. It has to remain intact for everyone's benefit, including yours." Gerald slid a document across the table. "This is a summary of Julian's personal estate, assets outside the family trust. As you can see, there's the house, some personal accounts, his vehicle." I looked at the numbers, but they didn't make sense. Everything seemed smaller than it should be. Julian ran a successful company. We lived modestly, but he had money. I knew he had money. "Where's the rest?" I asked. "The rest is in the company," Dominic explained, "which you'll benefit from as well. The family trust provides for widows of shareholders. You'll receive a monthly stipend, and you'll maintain certain privileges as a Rinder family member." "I don't want privileges. I want what Julian left me." Something hardened in Dominic's expression, just for a second, before the sympathy slid back into place. "What Julian left you is his legacy with the company. But that legacy has to be managed properly. We can't have shares being sold off to outsiders or decisions being made by people who don't understand the business." "I'm not an outsider. I'm his wife." "Widow," Gerald corrected gently. "And according to the prenuptial agreement you signed, in the event of Julian's death, company assets remain within the family trust structure." I felt like I'd been slapped. "What prenuptial agreement? We didn't sign a prenup." Dominic and Gerald exchanged a glance that made my stomach drop. "Catherine," Dominic said slowly, like he was talking to a child, "you signed the agreement the week before the wedding. Julian brought the documents to you at the community center. Don't you remember?" I did remember Julian bringing me papers to sign. But he'd said they were emergency contact forms for his insurance, medical power of attorney documents in case anything ever happened. Standard married couple paperwork. He'd apologized for the boring legal stuff and promised to make it up to me with dinner. "That wasn't a prenup," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "He said it was medical forms." Gerald pulled out another document. "This is your signature, is it not?" It was. Right there at the bottom of page after page of legal language I'd never read because I'd trusted my husband. Because he'd kissed my forehead and said it was just a formality and I'd believed him. "Julian wouldn't have tricked me into signing a prenup," I said, but I could hear the doubt creeping into my voice. "He wouldn't have lied about that. He didn't trick you, Dominic said, and now there was an edge to his tone. He protected the family business, which is what he was obligated to do as a renter. This is standard practice. Every family member signs the same agreements. But I thought. What did you think, Catherine? Dominic leaned forward. Did you think Julian would just hand over generations of family wealth to someone he'd known for less than a year? Did you think that's how these things work? The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The sympathy was cracking, revealing something else underneath. Something that had always been there but hidden. Dominic, Gerald said quietly, a warning. Dominic sat back, smoothing his expression. I apologize. That was harsh. We're all grieving, and this is a difficult conversation. The point is, these agreements are in place for everyone's protection, including yours. They ensure you'll be provided for without the burden of running a company you're not equipped to manage. Not equipped to manage. The words hung in the air like an accusation. What do I need to sign? I asked, exhausted and overwhelmed and wanting this conversation to end. These are just acknowledgement forms, Gerald said, sliding more papers toward me. Confirming that you understand the estate structure and agree to the terms of the trust regarding Julian's shares. I should have read them. I should have taken them to my own lawyer. I should have done 100 things differently. But I was 27 years old, and I'd just buried my husband. I was alone in a house full of his ghost, talking to people who spoke a language of trusts and agreements and legal structures I didn't understand. And they were his family. They were all I had left of him. So I signed. I signed everything they put in front of me. Dominic smiled when I finished, and it didn't reach his eyes. Thank you, Catherine. This makes everything much simpler. We'll process these and be in touch about the next steps. What next steps? For the house, he said casually, standing and gathering the documents. This property is technically owned by the family trust as well. We'll need to determine the best arrangement going forward. This is my home, I said, panic rising in my chest. Julian and I bought this together. Julian bought it, Gerald corrected. With funds from the company. Which makes it a company asset. You're taking my house? No one is taking anything, Dominic said. We're just determining what belongs where. You may very well be able to stay here. We just need to sort through the paperwork. These things take time. They left me sitting at that table, surrounded by papers I'd signed without reading, in a house that apparently wasn't mine, with a future that was suddenly completely uncertain. I called the only person I could think of. Marissa Kyng had been my closest friend since I'd moved to the city. We'd met at the community center where she taught art classes to kids. She was the one who'd introduced me to Julian, actually. He'd funded her program, and she'd brought me along to a thank you dinner. They're taking everything, I told her when she answered. The company, the house, all of it. What? Catherine, slow down. What happened? I explained about the prenup I'd apparently signed, about the trust agreements, about Dominic and the lawyer. Did you read what you signed today? Marissa asked. No. I just wanted them to leave. My voice broke. I don't know what I wanted. For this to not be happening. Catherine, you need to get a lawyer. Your own lawyer, not theirs. With what money? Everything was in Julian's accounts, and I can't access them. They said there's a monthly stipend, but it hasn't started yet. Then we'll figure something out. My cousin is a lawyer. I'll call him tomorrow, see if he'll consult for free or work out a payment plan. But Catherine, you can't sign anything else they give you. Promise me. Okay, I whispered. Are you safe there tonight? Do you want me to come over? No, I need to sleep. I need to stop thinking. That night, I went through Julian's office. Not snooping, just touching his things. His desk where he'd worked late into the night. His filing cabinets full of documents I'd never paid attention to. His laptop that was password protected. I found a folder labeled Estate Planning in the bottom drawer. Inside were copies of documents, trusts, agreements, corporate structures. And there, near the back, was a letter. It was addressed to me in Julian's handwriting, unsealed, like he'd never finished it or never worked up the courage to give it to me. Catherine, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and there are things you need to know. Things I should have told you a long time ago but didn't because I was a coward. My hands shook as I read. The company is in trouble. Has been for over a year. Bad investments, market changes, decisions I made trying to prove myself to my family. I've been using my personal assets to keep things afloat, but it's not enough. Dominic wants to sell to a Chinese investment firm. Mother wants to break up the company and liquidate. I've been fighting them, trying to save what my father built, but I'm losing. If something happens to me before I fix this, they'll try to take everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. They'll say it's about the company, about the family, but really it's about control. It's about making sure they win. I've tried to protect you the best way I know how. There are some personal accounts they don't know about. Offshore, separate from the business. Not much, maybe enough for a year or two of living expenses. The account information is in my safety deposit box at First National. Box 447. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of this desk. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stand up to them while I'm alive. I'm sorry I brought you into this family without preparing you for what they're capable of. I'm sorry for so many things. But please know this. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you made me want to be the man you believed I was. If I can find a way to fix this mess, I will. And if I can't, please don't let them make you feel small. You're worth more than all of them combined. I love you. Always. Julian. The letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. I sat on the floor of his office and cried until I couldn't breathe. Not just because he was gone, but because he'd been fighting alone. Because he'd been carrying this weight and trying to protect me, and I'd had no idea. Because he'd tried to leave me something, and I'd probably already signed it away. I found the key exactly where he said it would be. The next morning, I went to the bank. The safety deposit box held $10,000 in cash, account information for an offshore account with another $40,000, and one more thing. A flash drive labeled insurance. I didn't have time to look at it there, so I took everything home. I was about to plug the flash drive into Julian's laptop when someone knocked on my door. It was Patricia. She'd never come to my house alone before. Never without Dominic or Vanessa or some buffer. But there she was on my doorstep, dressed in a black suit that probably cost what I used to make in a month, her expression unreadable. "Catherine," she said. "May I come in? We need to talk." This was it. This was the moment when everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband's family, and my future was about to shatter completely. I stepped aside and let her in, the flash drive burning like a secret in my pocket. Patricia stood in my living room like she owned it. Looking back, I realized she thought she did. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, because my mother raised me to be polite even when my world was falling apart. "No, thank you. This won't take long." She didn't sit down, just stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, every inch the matriarch. "Catherine, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you deserve honesty." That should have been my second warning sign. When people announce they're about to be honest, it usually means they're about to be cruel. "The family has been discussing your situation," she continued, "and we've come to some decisions that affect you." Decisions about what? About how to handle Julian's estate and your place in the family going forward. She paused, and for just a moment, something that might have been genuine sympathy crossed her face. "You're young, Catherine. You have your whole life ahead of you. Staying tied to this family, to Julian's memory, to all of this, it's not healthy for you." "I loved your son," I said quietly. "I'm not trying to stay tied to anything. I'm just trying to grieve. I know you loved him. In your way." The words were careful, deliberate. "But love doesn't change the reality of your situation. Julian's debts are significant. The company is struggling. And maintaining this house, his expenses, your lifestyle, it's not sustainable." "What are you saying?" I'm saying that the family is willing to make you an offer. A generous offer, all things considered. She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. $250,000. Enough for you to start over, find a new place, build a new life. All you have to do is sign a release form stating that you have no further claims to the Rinder estate or the family business. I stared at the check. $250,000 was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was years of my salary at the community center. It was security and stability and freedom from this nightmare. It was also a fraction of what Julian's share of the company had to be worth. What about the monthly stipend Dominic mentioned? I asked. This is instead of the stipend. A clean break is better for everyone. You don't want to be dependent on us for years to come, and frankly, the family needs to move forward without complications. Complications. Is that what I am? Her expression hardened. You're a young woman who married into a family you don't understand, with responsibilities you can't handle. Julian knew that, which is why he signed the prenuptial agreement. Which is why he kept the business separate from his personal life. He was trying to protect you from exactly this kind of complexity. He left me a letter, I said, and I don't know why I told her. Maybe because I needed her to know that Julian had loved me, had tried to protect me. Maybe because I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. He told me the company was in trouble. He told me you and Dominic wanted to sell or liquidate. He told me. He told you his version of events, Patricia interrupted. Julian was brilliant in many ways, but he was drowning in denial about the state of the business. He made poor decisions trying to prove himself, and he refused to listen when Dominic and I tried to help him course correct. She moved closer, and her voice softened. Catherine, I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to help you. This money is a gift. It's far more than you're entitled to under the prenuptial agreement. Take it and move on with your life. Find someone new eventually. Have the family you and Julian never got the chance to build. Don't spend years fighting legal battles you can't win over money that doesn't exist. Money that doesn't exist? The company is worth something on paper, but it's bleeding cash. Julian's personal assets are already committed to covering corporate debts. When the dust settles, there may be nothing left anyway. This offer is coming from the family's personal funds, not the estate. We're doing this because Julian would have wanted you taken care of, not because we have any legal obligation. I thought about the flash drive in my pocket. About the offshore accounts Julian had mentioned in his letter. About the $50,000 I'd found in the safety deposit box that they clearly didn't know about. Can I think about it? I asked. Something flickered in Patricia's eyes. Annoyance, maybe. Or calculation. Of course. But Catherine, this offer expires in 48 hours. After that, things become much more complicated. We've been patient, we've been kind, but the lawyers are pushing for action. They want to freeze Julian's personal accounts, sell the house to cover debts, move forward with restructuring. I've been holding them off, but I can't do it indefinitely. You're saying if I don't take this, I'll get nothing? I'm saying if you don't take this, you'll spend months or years in legal proceedings that will cost you everything. Lawyer fees, court costs, fighting for scraps from an insolvent estate. Is that really how you want to spend the next chapter of your life? She left the check on the coffee table. $250,000 made out to Catherine Rinder. You have 48 hours, she said again. I hope you make the right choice. For your sake. After she left, I sat on the couch and stared at that check until the numbers blurred. $250,000. Security. Freedom. A way out of this nightmare. And all I had to do was walk away from everything Julian had left me. I called Marissa's cousin that afternoon. His name was David Kong, and he agreed to meet me the next day at his office downtown. Bring everything, he said. Every document they've given you, everything you've signed, anything you have from Julian. I need to see it all. That night, I finally looked at the flash drive. I plugged it into Julian's laptop, guessed his password on the second try, our wedding date, and opened the only folder on the drive. It was labeled evidence. Inside were dozens of files. Emails between Dominic and Patricia discussing how to phase Julian out of active management. Financial records showing money being moved from Julian's division of the company to Dominic's. Meeting minutes where decisions were made without Julian's input on projects he'd started and built. There were text messages between Vanessa and Dominic talking about the Catherine problem and how Julian's infatuation with that community center girl was jeopardizing the family's reputation and resources. There were documents showing that the company wasn't actually in trouble, not the way Patricia had implied. Julian's division was profitable. It was Dominic's expansion into luxury developments that was hemorrhaging money. And they were using Julian's success to cover Dominic's failures. And there was one email, sent from Patricia to Dominic 3 months before Julian died, that made my blood run cold. If Julian won't see reason about the restructuring, we may need to consider more aggressive options. The board will side with us if we can demonstrate instability. His obsession with those community projects, his refusal to prioritize family interests, we can use that. And if it comes down to it, the prenuptial agreement ensures that, even if he tries to leave the company, Catherine gets nothing. She has no claim, no power, no recourse. She's a non-factor. A non-factor. That's what I was to them. That's what I'd always been. I read through every file on that drive. By the time I finished, it was 3 a.m, and I understood. Julian hadn't been trying to save a failing company. He'd been trying to protect what he'd built from the people who wanted to take credit for it. He'd been fighting his own family, and he'd been losing. And then he died. Suddenly, unexpectedly. A heart attack at 32, with no history of heart problems. I told myself I was being paranoid. That grief was making me see conspiracies where there were only tragedies. That Patricia and Dominic were just opportunistic, not evil. But I made copies of everything on that flash drive. Multiple copies. I saved them to the cloud, to external drives, to email accounts they didn't know I had. Because Julian had called it insurance, and I was starting to understand why. The next morning, I met David Kong. He was in his 40s, sharp-eyed and serious, working out of a small office that was nothing like Gerald Fisk's expensive downtown suite. I showed him everything. The prenuptial agreement I'd apparently signed. The documents from Dominic and Gerald. Patricia's check. Julian's letter. And finally, the flash drive. He spent 2 hours going through it all while I sat in his waiting room drinking terrible coffee and trying not to fall apart. When he finally called me back in, his expression was grim. Catherine, I'm going to be honest with you. This is bad. How bad? The prenuptial agreement is airtight. You signed away any claim to the company, to Julian's trust distributions, to any assets acquired during the marriage using family funds, which, according to these documents, is basically everything. But Julian left me that letter. He had those accounts. The offshore account and the cash are yours. They can't touch those because they don't know about them, and they're not mentioned in any of the estate documents. But we're talking about $50,000 total. That's not nothing, but it's not a long-term solution. What about the flash drive? The evidence that they were cutting Julian out, that the company isn't actually failing. David leaned back in his chair. That's complicated. This evidence shows corporate malfeasance, possibly fraud. But proving it would require litigation that would take years and cost more money than you have. And even if we won, the prenuptial agreement still stands. You waived your claims to the company. So they just get away with it? They steal Julian's work, they push him out, and now they take everything. Unless you can prove that the prenuptial agreement was signed under duress or false pretenses, yes. And that's a very high bar to clear. I thought about Patricia's offer. $250,000 to walk away. If I don't take their buyout, what happens? They'll probably do exactly what Patricia threatened. Freeze accounts, force a sale of the house, drag everything through probate. You'll end up with whatever personal assets Julian had that aren't covered by the prenup, which, based on these documents, isn't much. And you'll have legal bills that will eat through the $50,000 you have saved. And if I do take it, you'll have money to start over. But you'll be signing away any future claims. If it turns out there's more money than they're saying, if the company recovers, if anything changes, you'll have no recourse. I sat there in that cheap office chair, thinking about my options. Both roads led to losing. The question was how much and how publicly. There's one more thing, David said carefully. The timing of Julian's death and this restructuring they're pushing through, it's convenient. Very convenient. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you wanted to investigate further, to push for an autopsy review or look into the circumstances around his death, we could. But that's a serious accusation, and you'd need real evidence, not just suspicion. I thought about Julian in that hotel room alone. About the heart attack that came from nowhere. About the email talking about aggressive options. But I was 27 years old, broke, alone, and going up against a family with unlimited resources and lawyers on retainer. I can't fight them, I whispered. Can I? David looked at me with something like pity. Not the way things stand now. I'm sorry, Catherine. Sometimes the system protects the people with money, not the people who deserve justice. I left his office feeling more hopeless than when I'd arrived. I had 48 hours to decide whether to take Patricia's money and disappear, or stand on principle and lose everything anyway. That afternoon, Vanessa called. Catherine, hi. I heard Mother came by yesterday. Her voice was warm, friendly, concerned. How are you holding up? I'm okay, I lied. Listen, I know this is all so overwhelming. And I know Mother can be intense. But she really is trying to help. We all are. By pushing me to sign away any claim to Julian's estate? Vanessa sighed. It's not like that. It's about protecting everyone. The company is in real trouble, Catherine. If it goes under, it's not just the family that loses. It's hundreds of employees, their families, all the people who depend on Rinder Holdings. Mother and Dominic are trying to save it, and they can't do that if everything is tied up in probate. Julian's files show the company is profitable. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, Julian's files were incomplete. He didn't have access to all the divisions, all the numbers. He was working with partial information. Or you're lying to me, Catherine. Her voice got harder. I understand you're grieving. I understand you're angry. But accusing the family of lying isn't going to change the reality of your situation. You have an opportunity to walk away with a substantial amount of money. That's more than most widows in your position would get. Most widows in my position? Most widows who were married for 3 years and signed prenuptial agreements. Yes, the mask was slipping. The sympathy was fading. I was seeing what had been underneath all along. I need to go, I said. Wait. Catherine, I'm trying to be your friend here. Take the money. Start over. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Or what? Or things get ugly. Legal proceedings, public records, questions about why you married Julian in the first place. Do you really want people examining your relationship, your motivations? Do you really want to be painted as the gold digger who's trying to steal from her dead husband's grieving family? There it was. The threat underneath the sympathy. I loved Julian, I said, my voice shaking. I'm sure you did. But love doesn't hold up in court. Signatures do. And you signed everything, Catherine. You just didn't read it carefully enough. She hung up. I sat in my house, the house that apparently wasn't mine, and realized I was completely trapped. They'd planned for this. Maybe not Julian's death specifically, but they'd prepared for the possibility. They'd made sure I had no legal ground to stand on. They'd isolated me, controlled the narrative, and now they were offering me just enough money to make walking away seem reasonable. And if I didn't walk away, they'd destroy me. I had 48 hours to decide. I spent that night going through Julian's things one more time. His clothes in the closet. His books on the shelves. His notes in the margins about projects he'd wanted to start, communities he'd wanted to help, dreams we'd shared. In the back of his nightstand, I found one more thing. A small velvet box I'd never seen before. Inside was a necklace. Simple, elegant, with a pendant that held a tiny inscription. For Catherine. The strongest person I know. You'll know when you need this. Jay. I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't feel strong. I felt broken and lost and completely defeated. But I put the necklace on anyway, because it was the last gift from my husband, and I needed to hold on to something. I had 24 hours left to decide my future. And I had no idea that the decision I was about to make would turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life. I decided not to take the money. It wasn't nobility or courage. It was stubbornness. It was the memory of Julian's letter saying they'd try to take everything. It was that voice in the back of my head, the one that sounded like my father, saying that sometimes you have to stand on principle even when it costs you. I called Patricia the next morning, 2 hours before her 48-hour deadline. I need more time, I told her. I need to understand what I'm signing away before I make this decision. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make my stomach drop. Catherine, she said finally, and her voice was ice. I've been more than patient with you. More than generous. But my patience has limits. I just want to review everything with my lawyer. Your lawyer. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You've hired a lawyer? With what money exactly? I have some savings. No, you don't. Julian's accounts are frozen as of this morning. The family accounts you had access to as his wife are now part of the estate proceedings. You have whatever cash you physically had in hand, and that's all. My heart started pounding. You can't do that. It's already done. Gerald filed the paperwork yesterday afternoon. Standard procedure for estate management. Every asset has to be accounted for and frozen until probate is complete. How am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to pay bills? That's what the settlement offer was for. But since you've chosen to consult lawyers and make this difficult, that offer is withdrawn. You'll get whatever the probate court determines you're entitled to, and not a penny more. Patricia, please. You had your chance, Catherine. You could have walked away with $250,000 and your dignity intact. Instead, you've chosen to fight a battle you cannot possibly win. I hope your lawyer is worth it. She hung up. I checked my bank accounts immediately. She was right. Everything was frozen. The joint account I'd used for groceries and bills showed a balance, but wouldn't let me make withdrawals. Julian's business account was locked. Even the credit cards were declined. I had the $50,000 from Julian's safety deposit box, but I'd spent $800 of it on David Kang's retainer. I had my own small savings account from before the marriage, maybe $3,000. And I had a house I apparently didn't own and no income. I called David Kang. They froze everything, I told him. Can they do that? If they filed for estate administration, yes. It's supposed to protect the assets until distribution, but it also cuts off your access. How much cash do you have available? About $52,000. That they don't know about. Don't tell anyone about it. That's your emergency fund. But Catherine, I have to be honest, that's not enough to fight a prolonged legal battle. Estate litigation against a family like the Rinders could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. So what do I do? You could try to negotiate a new settlement. They've withdrawn the original offer, but once they realize you're serious about fighting, they might come back with something else. Or you accept that the prenuptial agreement is valid, take whatever the probate court gives you, and move on. It won't be much, but it'll be something. I felt the walls closing in. Every option led to losing. The only question was how much. That afternoon, the locks on my house were changed. I came back from the grocery store. I'd gone to buy food with the cash I had left, and my key didn't work. There was a notice taped to the door from a property management company I'd never heard of, stating that the residence was under new management pending estate resolution, and I needed to contact their office to arrange access to collect my personal belongings. I stood on my own front porch with bags of groceries in my hands and nowhere to go. I called Dominic. He didn't answer. I called Patricia. She didn't answer. I called Vanessa, and she picked up on the fourth ring. Catherine, I heard about the locks. I'm so sorry. How did you hear? Did you know they were going to do this? It's not like that. The estate lawyers decided the property needed to be secured. There were concerns about asset preservation. Asset preservation? Vanessa, I live here. This is my home. I know, and nobody wants you to be homeless. You can collect your personal items, just not the furniture or anything that was purchased with family funds. And you'll need to do it in the next 72 hours. Where am I supposed to go? Don't you have friends? What about that woman from the community center? Marissa. I could stay with Marissa. But the thought of showing up on her doorstep, essentially homeless, made me want to disappear. This is insane, I said. They can't just lock me out of my house. It's not your house, Catherine. It never was. That's what the prenuptial agreement specified. I know it's harsh, but you need to accept reality. The reality is that your family is stealing from me. Her voice went cold. Be very careful about the accusations you make. Slander and defamation are serious legal matters. You're already in a precarious position. Don't make it worse. I ended up at Marissa's apartment that night with 2 suitcases of clothes and a bag of toiletries. She welcomed me without judgment, set me up on her couch, and made tea while I cried. They took everything, I said. The house, the money, all of it. What about the lawyer? What did David say? That I can't afford to fight them. That the prenup is valid. That I'm basically screwed. Marissa was quiet for a moment. What about the flash drive? The evidence Julian left. David says it proves corporate fraud, but doesn't invalidate the prenup. And investigating it would cost more than I have. So they just win? They steal Julian's work, lock you out of your house, and walk away clean. Unless I can prove the prenup was signed under false pretenses, yes. But Julian lied about what you were signing. Doesn't that count? I'd have to prove he lied. And he's dead, so it's my word against legal documents that I signed. I spent the next 2 weeks in a fog. I went back to the house with a property manager escort and packed up my personal belongings, clothes, photos, books, anything that was demonstrably mine from before the marriage. Everything else, the furniture we'd picked out together, the dishes, the artwork, even the television stayed. Those items were purchased with funds from the Rinder family accounts, the property manager explained, reading from a list Gerald Fisk had provided. Their estate assets. I took what I could fit in Marissa's car and left behind 3 years of memories. The community center offered me my old job back. The pay was terrible, $35,000 a year, but it was something. I started working again, going through the motions, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. But everywhere I went, I felt the weight of what I'd lost. Then, about a month after Julian's death, I saw the announcement. Rinder Holdings was being restructured. Dominic Rinder was named CEO. The company was entering a new era of growth and innovation with a focus on luxury development and high-end commercial properties. All of Julian's community investment projects were being shut down. The programs he'd funded, the initiatives he'd started, the communities he'd promised to help, all of it was being eliminated. Streamlining operations, they called it. Refocusing on core profitable ventures. I called the company's main office and asked to speak to Dominic. His secretary said he wasn't available. I called every day for a week. He never took my calls. Then I saw him. I was leaving the community center one evening when a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Dominic stepped out, looking around like he'd entered a war zone. "Catherine," he said when he saw me. "I'm glad I caught you. You've been avoiding my calls. I've been busy with the transition. I'm sure you understand." I understand you're shutting down everything Julian built. I'm making necessary business decisions. Julian's projects were well-intentioned, but not financially sustainable. The company can't function as a charity. Those projects were profitable. I saw the numbers on Julian's flash drive. His expression flickered. What flash drive? The one where he documented everything. Your emails with Patricia about phasing him out. The financial records showing his division was covering losses from your luxury developments. All of it. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. Catherine, if you had evidence of wrongdoing, your lawyer would have filed complaints by now. The fact that you're standing here threatening me instead tells me you don't have anything actionable. Just a widow grasping at straws. I know what you did. You know what a dead man's paranoid files suggested. That's not evidence. That's grief. He stepped closer. Here's what I know. You signed a prenuptial agreement. You signed estate documents. You refused a generous settlement offer. And now you're living on your friend's couch making $35,000 a year while my family controls a company worth $50 million. So ask yourself, Catherine, who won here? Julian won't stay silent forever. People will find out what you did. Julian is dead. And the only person talking about conspiracy theories is his widow, who everyone already thinks married him for money. So please, go ahead. Tell people. See who believes you. He got back in his Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk shaking with rage and helplessness. That night, I looked at the flash drive again. All that evidence, all those files, and David was right, none of it was enough. Corporate malfeasance was hard to prove and harder to prosecute. I'd need forensic accountants, corporate lawyers, investigators. I'd need resources I didn't have. The necklace Julian had left me felt heavy around my neck. You'll know when you need this, the inscription said. I needed it now. I needed all of it. But I didn't understand what he'd meant. 2 months after Julian's death, the probate court made its ruling. I was entitled to Julian's personal effects, already collected. I was entitled to his vehicle, a 7-year-old sedan worth maybe $8,000. And I was entitled to the life insurance payout of $100,000. Except the life insurance had a clause. If death occurred during company-related travel, the payout went to the company to cover any outstanding corporate debts. Julian had died in a hotel room during a business trip. The insurance company paid out to Rinder Holdings, not to me. My total inheritance from 3 years of marriage was a used car and a box of photographs. David Kong called me after the ruling. I'm sorry, Catherine. The prenuptial agreement held. There's nothing more we can do. What about the evidence? What about investigating his death? To do that, you'd need to hire a private investigator, pay for an independent autopsy review, and probably retain a criminal lawyer if you found anything actionable. We're talking $100,000 minimum, maybe more. And that's with no guarantee of finding anything. I had $41,000 left. The rest had gone to lawyer fees, living expenses, and the deposit on a tiny studio apartment I was moving into at the end of the month. I couldn't afford justice. Thank you for your help, I told David. Catherine, for what it's worth, I believe you. I believe they manipulated the situation and took advantage of your grief. But belief doesn't win court cases. Evidence does. And they made sure there wasn't enough. I moved into my studio apartment 3 weeks later. It was in a building with thin walls and broken elevators, nothing like the house Julian and I had shared. I unpacked my 2 suitcases of clothes, set up my few personal items, and tried to accept that this was my life now. Alone. Broke. Defeated. Then, one afternoon about 4 months after Julian's death, I saw Vanessa. She was at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list thicker than a phone book. I was walking past on my way home from work when I saw her through the window. She wasn't alone. She was sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, attractive, wearing an expensive suit. They were holding hands across the table. She was laughing at something he'd said, leaning in close, looking at him the way people in love look at each other. That wouldn't have been strange except for one thing. She was wearing black. Mourning clothes. Julian had been dead for 4 months, and his sister-in-law was on what was clearly a romantic date while dressed like a grieving widow. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching through the window, and something clicked into place. Vanessa had been too helpful, too sympathetic, too ready with advice about taking the settlement and moving on. I thought back to the emails on Julian's flash drive. The texts between her and Dominic about the Catherine problem. What if it wasn't just about me? I pulled out my phone and started searching. It took me 20 minutes of digging through social media and public records, but I found it. The man Vanessa was having dinner with was Marcus Yates, Vice President of Acquisitions for Meridian Capital, the investment firm that Dominic had wanted to sell the company to, the one Julian had mentioned in his letter. Vanessa was dating the man who stood to make millions if the Rinder family sold their company. This wasn't just about inheritance. This wasn't just about pushing me out. This was bigger than I'd realized. I took photos through the restaurant window. Vanessa and Marcus holding hands, kissing over dessert, leaving together with his arm around her waist. Then I went home and started digging deeper. If they'd lied about this, what else had they lied about? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I spent 3 days following Vanessa. Not physically, I couldn't afford to be obvious. But digitally, through social media, public records, property databases. Everything you can find when you have time and motivation. Vanessa Rinder had married Dominic 5 years ago. Society wedding, all the right people, covered in the lifestyle sections. She came from money herself. Her father owned a chain of high-end hotels across the West Coast. But 6 months ago, those hotels had filed for bankruptcy protection. Her family had lost everything right around the time Julian's company started struggling. I cross-referenced dates. The bankruptcy filing happened 2 weeks before Julian told Patricia and Dominic about refusing to sell to Meridian Capital. 1 month before Julian died. I called David Kong. I found something, I said. Vanessa's family went bankrupt right before Julian died. And now she's dating the VP of the company that wants to buy Rinder Holdings. That's suspicious, but it's not evidence of anything illegal. What if they killed him? Silence. Then, carefully, Catherine, that's a serious accusation. He was 32 and healthy. He died of a sudden heart attack with no witnesses. And the people who benefited are now dating executives from the company that wanted to buy his business. To prove murder, you'd need evidence of means and opportunity. Medical evidence. Toxicology reports that show something suspicious. Do you have any of that? No. But I could request an independent autopsy. With what money? And even if you found something, proving who did it is another matter entirely. Catherine, I understand you're angry. But you need to be realistic about what you can actually accomplish. I hung up and stared at my apartment walls. He was right. I had suspicions but no proof. Theories but no resources. Anger but no power. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Catherine Rinder? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. Yes. My name is Diane Foster. I'm calling from the law offices of Booth and Associates in Chicago. We've been trying to reach you for several months regarding the estate of Richard Ashford. Richard Ashford. The name hit me like cold water. The man from the hospice. The one I'd read when I was 19. The one whose funeral I'd attended alone. I remember Mr. Ashford, I said slowly. But he passed away years ago. 8 years ago, yes. His estate has been in trust administration since then. You were named as a beneficiary, but we had outdated contact information. We only recently located you through a private investigator. I'm a beneficiary? I only knew him for a few months. Mr. Ashford left very specific instructions. He wanted to provide for the young woman who showed him kindness when no one else did. Mrs. Rinder, You've inherited a substantial sum. My heart started pounding. How substantial? The estate was valued at just over $200 million at the time of his death. After 8 years of conservative investment and trust management, your inheritance is currently valued at approximately $218 million. The room spun. That's not possible. I assure you it's quite real. Mr. Ashford was very specific about wanting you to receive this inheritance when you needed it most. There were conditions. You had to be at least 25 years old, and the trustees were instructed to verify that you maintained the character and compassion Mr. Ashford valued. We've been observing from a distance, and the trustees unanimously agree that you meet all requirements. $200 million. Plus $18 million in growth, yes. There are some tax implications we'll need to discuss, and the transfer process will take a few weeks. But Mrs. Rinder, as of this moment, you are a very wealthy woman. I sat down before I fell down. Why didn't you find me sooner? We tried. But you moved several times after college, changed your name when you married, and our letters were returned. We finally hired an investigator 3 months ago. Given the amount involved, we wanted to be absolutely certain we had the right Catherine Wells before making contact. 3 months ago. Right when I'd lost everything. When can I access the funds? We'll need to meet in person to finalize paperwork. Can you come to Chicago next week? We'll cover all travel expenses, of course. Yes. Absolutely yes. After she hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and laughed until I cried. $218 million. Julian's necklace suddenly made sense. You'll know when you need this. He'd known about my inheritance. Somehow he'd known. I pulled out my laptop and searched for information about Richard Ashford. Billionaire philanthropist. Founder of Ashford Industries. Died 8 years ago with no living family. And in one article from his obituary, a quote, Mr. Ashford recently updated his will to include a young volunteer who showed him extraordinary kindness during his final months. That was me. And Julian had somehow found out. I went through his office documents again, the ones I'd kept. In a folder marked Personal Research, I found it, a private investigator's report on Richard Ashford's estate, dated 2 years ago. Julian had known I was Richard's beneficiary. He'd known I had money coming. He'd never told me because he wanted me to love him for who he was, not what I might someday have. And he'd left me that necklace as a message. When things got bad enough, when I needed it most, the inheritance would come through. I cried for an hour. For Julian, for everything we'd lost, for the life we'd never have. Then I stopped crying and started planning. Patricia and Dominic thought they'd won. They thought I was broken, defeated, living in poverty while they controlled Julian's legacy. They had no idea what was coming. But I couldn't move too fast. If they knew about the inheritance, they'd find a way to interfere. I needed to be smart. I called Diane Foster back. I need this kept completely confidential, I said. No one can know about the inheritance until the transfer is complete. That's standard practice. Estate matters are privileged information. And I need recommendations for lawyers. The best corporate and estate attorneys you know. Money is no object. I can arrange that. Mrs. Rinder, may I ask what you're planning? I looked at the photos of Vanessa and Marcus on my phone. At the flash drive full of evidence. At Julian's letter promising me I was worth more than all of them combined. I'm planning to get justice for my husband. And I'm going to need help. Then you've called the right firm. Mr. Ashford specifically chose us because we don't lose. Ever. I flew to Chicago the next week. Met with the lawyers, signed the paperwork, and watched as $218 million transferred into accounts in my name. Then I hired the best legal team money could buy. Corporate lawyers who specialized in fraud. Estate attorneys who'd never lost a case. A private investigator who'd worked for the FBI. A forensic accountant who could trace money through shell corporations. And I told them everything. About Julian's death. About the prenuptial agreement signed under false pretenses. About Vanessa and Marcus. About the company being stolen through corporate manipulation. We'll need time, the lead attorney said. His name was James Hartwell, 60 years old, with a reputation for destroying corporations that engaged in fraud. Investigations, evidence gathering, building an airtight case. How long? 4 to 6 months to gather everything. Then we move. What about Julian's death? Can we investigate that? We'll hire the best. If there's evidence of foul play, we'll find it. I flew back home and went back to my studio apartment. Back to my job at the community center. Back to the life where everyone thought I had nothing. But everything had changed. I was no longer the victim. I was the weapon. And I was patient. 3 months later, the investigator called. We found something in Julian's toxicology report. My heart stopped. What? Traces of a substance that can mimic heart attack symptoms. It's rare, hard to detect, metabolizes quickly. The original autopsy missed it because they weren't looking for it. Someone poisoned him? It's likely. And we traced the substance to a prescription filled by Vanessa Rinder 2 weeks before his death. She claimed it was for anxiety, but the dosage and type suggest other uses. I sat down, shaking. She killed him. We can't prove she administered it, but we can prove she had access to the substance and opportunity. Combined with motive, her family's bankruptcy, her relationship with Marcus Yates, her financial benefit from Julian's death, we can build a case. What do? We take everything we have to the police. But Catherine, I need to prepare you. Even with this evidence, prosecution isn't guaranteed. Rich people have good lawyers. So do I said. Better ones. The next 4 months were the longest of my life. I went to work every day, lived in my tiny apartment, let the Rinder family think they'd won. Meanwhile, my team was building a case that would destroy them. We had evidence of corporate fraud, of estate manipulation, of conspiracy, and now, potentially, of murder. But I didn't move yet, because I wanted them to feel safe first. I wanted them to celebrate their victory, to enjoy what they'd stolen. And then I wanted to take it all away in the most public, devastating way possible. 6 months after I'd inherited Richard Ashford's fortune, my lawyers told me we were ready. We filed criminal complaints with the DA's office regarding Julian's death. Civil suits for fraud, estate manipulation, and breach of fiduciary duty. And we've purchased shares in Rinder Holdings through shell corporations. How many shares? James Hartwell smiled. 49%. Just enough to make you the largest single shareholder. Just enough to give you control. How much did that cost? $78 million. But it's worth it. Catherine, when this goes public, you won't just get justice. You'll get everything. I thought about Patricia telling me I was a non-factor. About Dominic asking who won. About Vanessa advising me to take the money and disappear. When do we move? I asked. The annual shareholder meeting is in 2 weeks. That's when you make your entrance. And the criminal investigation? The DA is moving forward based on our evidence. Arrest warrants will be issued the same day as the shareholder meeting. We've coordinated the timing. I smiled for the first time in months. Then let's end this. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence. It was pretending nothing had changed. I still lived in my studio apartment, still worked at the community center, still drove Julian's old sedan. Every day I watched Patricia's social media posts about charity galas and family gatherings. Every day I saw Dominic quoted in business journals about his visionary leadership of Rinder Holdings. Every day I smiled and nodded when people at work said how sorry they were about my situation. And every day I wanted to scream the truth. But James Hartwell was clear. The moment they know you have resources, they'll start hiding assets and building defenses. You need the element of surprise. So I waited. The private investigator, a woman named Carol Martinez, called with updates weekly. Each one made me sicker. We've confirmed Vanessa purchased the drug that killed Julian from an online pharmacy using a fake name. The package was delivered to a P.O. box she rented 2 weeks before his death. We found emails between Dominic and Marcus Yates discussing the company sale, dated 3 days before Julian died. They were already negotiating terms. Patricia moved $2 million from company accounts into personal holdings the week after Julian's funeral. She classified it as estate management fees. They'd planned it. All of it. Julian hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered so they could take his company and sell it for parts. And I'd almost let them get away with it. The forensic accountant found worse. Julian's community programs hadn't just been shut down, they'd been looted. Equipment donated to youth centers had been sold. Grants meant for after-school programs had been redirected to Dominic's luxury developments. Money that was supposed to help struggling families had paid for Patricia's European vacation. They'd stolen from the people Julian had tried to help. I broke down in my lawyer's office when I heard that. They didn't just kill him, I sobbed. They destroyed everything he built. Everything he cared about. James handed me tissues. Which is why we're going to destroy them. Completely. No mercy, no settlements, no deals. We're going to tear down everything they have and make sure the world knows exactly what they did. But there were complications. The DA assigned to the case was hesitant. The evidence is compelling, but it's circumstantial. We have the drug, we have motive, we have opportunity. But we don't have proof that Vanessa actually administered it. What more do you need? I demanded. A witness. Security footage. Something that puts her in that hotel room. Without that, a good defense attorney will create reasonable doubt. Carol went back to work. She interviewed hotel staff, pulled security archives, traced credit card records. And she found it. Vanessa had been in Chicago the night Julian died. Her credit card showed a charge at a restaurant 3 blocks from Julian's hotel. Security footage from the hotel showed a woman matching her description entering the building at 9:47 p.m. Julian's time of death was estimated at 11:30 p.m. It's not definitive, Carol said. The footage quality isn't great, and she's wearing sunglasses and a hat. But combined with everything else, it's enough. The DA agreed to move forward with charges. But then Vanessa disappeared. 1 week before the shareholder meeting, she vanished. Her phone went to voicemail. Her credit cards went unused. She simply dropped off the grid. She ran, I said. Someone tipped her off. James disagreed. More likely she's being hidden. The family knows something's coming, they just don't know what. They're protecting their weakest link. We had bigger problems, though. 3 of the shell corporations I'd used to buy Rinder Holdings shares were being challenged. Someone had filed paperwork questioning the legitimacy of the sales, claiming stock manipulation. It's Gerald Fisk, James said. He's fishing. He doesn't know who's behind the purchases, but he knows something's happening. Can they block the shares? Not before the meeting. But they're going to try to delay it. They did. 2 days before the scheduled shareholder meeting, Rinder Holdings announced a postponement due to procedural concerns. I called James in a panic. They're stalling. They know something. Then we force their hand. We go public with what we have. But you said surprise was crucial. It was. But we're past that now. Catherine, we have enough evidence to destroy them whether they see us coming or not. The only question is whether you're ready to stop hiding. I thought about my tiny apartment. My community center job. The life I'd been living for 8 months, while the people who killed my husband celebrated their victory. I'm ready. We called a press conference for the next morning. I wore the black suit my lawyers bought me. Styled my hair. Put on the necklace Julian had left me. And I stood in front of cameras and told the world everything. About Julian's death and the evidence of poisoning. About the corporate fraud and stolen community funds. About the prenuptial agreement signed under false pretenses and the estate manipulation. Julian Rinder was murdered by his own family so they could steal his company, I said, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. And I have spent the last 8 months gathering proof. Today, Criminal charges are being filed against Vanessa Kongrinder for murder. Civil charges are being filed against Patricia Rinder and Dominic Rinder for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. And I am here to announce that I now own 49% of Rinder Holdings, which makes me the majority shareholder. The reporters erupted with questions. How did you afford to purchase the shares? Where is Vanessa Rinder? What evidence do you have? I answered each question calmly, clinically. James stood beside me, occasionally interjecting legal clarifications. By the time we finished, the story was everywhere. News sites, social media, television. Catherine Rinder, the widow who'd been stripped of everything, was now the woman bringing down a corporate dynasty. Patricia called within an hour. I didn't answer. Dominic's lawyer called next, threatening lawsuits for defamation. James laughed and hung up. Then the police found Vanessa. She was in a house in the countryside, owned by one of Patricia's shell companies. When they arrested her, she immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to speak. But the evidence spoke for her. The DA filed charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud. The press coverage was relentless. I should have felt victorious. But instead, I felt empty. Because none of it brought Julian back. I sat in my apartment that night, watching news coverage of Vanessa's arrest, and cried. Not tears of triumph, tears of grief. I did it, I whispered to Julian's photo. I got them. But you're still gone. The next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. Catherine Rinder? A man's voice, old and rough. Who is this? My name is Thomas Ashford, Richard's younger brother. I need to talk to you about your inheritance. My blood went cold. I already finalized everything with the lawyers. I'm not contesting it. I'm calling to warn you. There are people who know about Richard's fortune now. People who will come after you. You made yourself a target by going public. What people? The kind who think $200 million is worth killing for. Be careful, Catherine. Richard chose you because you were kind. Don't let this money turn you into something you're not. And don't let it destroy you the way it destroyed him. He hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Carol. I need security. Personal protection. Someone's threatening me. Already arranged, she said. James anticipated this. You'll have a team starting tomorrow. That night, someone broke into my apartment. I wasn't there. I was at Marissa's, too afraid to stay alone after the phone call. But when I went back the next morning with security, the place had been ransacked. They'd gone through everything. Torn apart my couch, emptied drawers, smashed open the back of my television. They were looking for something, the security chief said. Documents, probably. Or account information. I don't keep anything here. It's all with the lawyers. They didn't know that. I moved into a hotel that day. Checked in under a fake name, paid cash, told no one but my legal team where I was. And I realized that winning wasn't going to be clean or simple. The Rinder family wasn't just going to roll over. They were going to fight back with everything they had. And now that I'd declared war publicly, they knew exactly where to aim. The shareholder meeting was rescheduled for the following week. James assured me we had the votes, the shares, the legal standing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Some final blow I hadn't anticipated. 3 days before the meeting, Dominic's lawyer filed an emergency injunction claiming I'd purchased the shares using illegally obtained funds. They're claiming the inheritance was meant for charity, James explained. That Richard Ashford's will is being contested by distant relatives. It's garbage, but it's designed to freeze your assets until it's resolved. Can they do that? They can try. We're fighting it. But Catherine, you need to prepare for the possibility that the shares get frozen before the meeting. Then I'll have nothing. They'll win. You'll still have the criminal case against Vanessa. You'll still have the civil fraud charges. You won't have control of the company, but you'll have justice. Justice without power felt hollow. That night, I got another call. This time from a number I recognized. Patricia. Against my better judgment, I answered. You should have taken the money when I offered it, she said, her voice tight with rage. You should have disappeared quietly. But you had to make this public. You had to try to destroy us. You murdered your own son. I loved Julian. We all did. But he was weak. He let his emotions cloud his judgment. He was going to run the company into the ground with his charity projects and idealistic nonsense. We did what we had to do to protect the family legacy. The casual admission stunned me. You're confessing? I'm telling you the truth off the record, so you understand what you're up against. You think your money and your lawyers make you powerful? You're playing in a world you don't understand, Catherine. People like us don't lose to people like you. We'll see. Yes, we will. And when this is over, when you've lost everything again, I want you to remember that I gave you a chance to walk away. She hung up. I recorded the conversation. Every word. And I sent it directly to the DA. The next day, Patricia Rinder was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. The shareholder meeting was 4 days away. And I was about to find out if justice was real or if money and power always won in the end. The night before the shareholder meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my hotel room watching the news cycle repeat the same story. Rinder family dynasty crumbles amid murder charges. Patricia's mugshot. Vanessa's arrest footage. Dominic refusing to comment as he rushed past reporters. My phone buzzed. Marissa. Turn on channel 7. Now. I switched channels and froze. It was an interview with someone I'd never seen before. The caption read, "Former Rinder Holdings employee speaks out." Julian Rinder was the only one who cared about the people, the woman said. She was maybe 60, gray-haired, wearing a simple dress. When my son got sick, Julian personally paid his medical bills. Didn't ask for publicity, didn't want recognition. Just did it because it was right. And when he died, they shut down every program he'd created. Fired everyone who'd been loyal to him. They destroyed his legacy. The interviewer leaned forward. What do you think about Catherine Rinder's lawsuit? I think she's doing what Julian would have wanted. Someone needs to hold them accountable. More people came forward over the next hour. Community center directors. Youth program coordinators. Families Julian had helped. All of them speaking about the man he'd been and the destruction his family had caused. My phone exploded with messages. We're with you. Thank you for fighting. Julian would be proud. People I'd never met were supporting me. Strangers who'd been helped by Julian's kindness were standing up publicly. I called James. Did you arrange this? No. This is organic. People saw your press conference and started talking. Catherine, you're not alone in this anymore. You have an army behind you. The next morning, the emergency injunction hearing took place. Dominic's lawyers argued that my inheritance was under investigation and therefore couldn't be used for stock purchases. They had affidavits from distant Ashford relatives claiming Richard had been mentally incompetent when he changed his will. James demolished them in 10 minutes. Mrs. Rinder's inheritance was thoroughly vetted by Richard Ashford's estate lawyers over 8 years. The notion that distant relatives who never visited him, who abandoned him in his final years, have more claim than the woman who showed him compassion is absurd. This is a transparent attempt to interfere with legitimate business transactions. The judge agreed. The injunction was denied. My shares were valid. The meeting would proceed. But I still had a choice to make. James laid it out that afternoon in his office. You can take control of the company and run it yourself. Or you can force a sale, liquidate everything, and walk away with your money. Both options are viable. What's the difference? If you take control, you're committing to running a $50 million company. That means board meetings, corporate decisions, managing employees. It's a full-time job and you have no experience. And if I force a sale, you'll make a profit on your shares, probably another $50 million. Combined with your inheritance, you'll have $250 million and zero responsibilities. You can disappear, live anywhere, do anything. I thought about my studio apartment. My community center job. The quiet life I'd had before Julian, before all of this. I could take the money and vanish. Let the Rinder family implode on their own. Watch from a distance as Vanessa and Patricia face trial. Or I could stay and fight. Take everything they'd stolen and rebuild what Julian had wanted to create. What would you do? I asked James. He smiled. I'd burn it all down and make them watch. That night, I visited Julian's grave for the first time since his funeral. I'd been too angry, too hurt, too consumed with survival to come before. But now I needed to talk to him. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, I said to the headstone. I'm not a businesswoman. I'm not a fighter. I'm just me. And they're expecting some powerful version of me that I don't know how to be. The wind rustled the trees around the cemetery. Somewhere in the distance, I heard children laughing in a park. Julian had died trying to help communities like that, trying to make the world better in small, practical ways. If I walked away, who would continue that work? I pulled out my phone and called Marissa. I need your help, I said. And I need you to connect me with everyone who worked on Julian's community programs. Why? Because I'm not walking away. I'm taking the company, and I'm going to finish what Julian started. But I can't do it alone. Over the next 18 hours, I built a team. Directors from the community programs Julian had funded. Social workers who understood the neighborhoods he'd cared about. Financial advisors who specialized in ethical investing. People who believed in the mission, not just the profit. If I take control tomorrow, I told them in an emergency meeting the night before the shareholder vote, I'm reinstating every program Julian created. I'm investing in communities that have been ignored. I'm using this company the way he wanted to use it, to make money and do good at the same time. The board will fight you on that, one of the advisors warned. Profit margins, shareholder value, they'll say you're being irresponsible. Then we'll prove them wrong. We'll show that doing the right thing can also be profitable. And if it's not, I have enough money to subsidize it myself. They agreed to join me. All of them. For the first time since Julian died, I felt like I wasn't alone. The morning of the shareholder meeting, I got one final call. Dominic. Catherine, we need to talk before this meeting. There's still time to settle this privately. I'm not interested in settlements. I'm offering you everything. Full ownership of the company, no contest. We'll sign over all the shares, walk away from management. You win. What's the catch? You drop the criminal charges against my mother and wife. You make a public statement that Julian's death was natural and any suggestion otherwise was based on grief and misunderstanding. My hand tightened on the phone. You want me to let them get away with murder? I want to save what's left of this family. My mother is 70 years old, Catherine. She'll die in prison. Vanessa has 2 young children who need their mother. Is revenge really worth destroying all those lives? I thought about those children. About Patricia's age. About the cost of justice. Then I thought about Julian, alone in that hotel room, dying from poison his own family had given him. Your mother told me herself that Julian was weak and needed to be stopped. I recorded the conversation. It's all ready with the DA. Silence. Then, you're making a mistake. No. You made the mistake. When you decided my husband's life was worth less than your company. When you looked at me and thought I was too small to fight back. That was your mistake. I hung up. 20 minutes later, I walked into the Rinder Holdings boardroom. The same room where Patricia had tried to dismiss me 8 months ago. The same table where they'd discussed selling Julian's legacy. But this time, I wasn't the grieving widow with nothing. I was the majority shareholder. And I was taking everything. Dominic sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and board members. He looked older than I remembered, gray and tired. Mrs. Rinder, he said formally. Shall we begin? I pulled out my chair and sat down. The boardroom held 12 people. Dominic and his 3 loyalists. 5 independent board members who looked uncomfortable. Gerald Fisk. 2 corporate secretaries taking minutes. And me. Before we begin the standard agenda, Dominic said, I need to address the elephant in the room. Catherine Rinder has purchased a significant number of company shares through shell corporations. We're here to determine the legitimacy of those purchases and whether. 49%, I interrupted. I own 49% of this company, which makes me the largest single shareholder and gives me controlling interest. So let's be clear about who's running this meeting. One of the independent board members, an older woman named Susan Crawford, leaned forward. Mrs. Rinder, can you verify those holdings? James distributed packets to everyone at the table. Complete documentation of all share purchases, transfer records, and financial verification. Everything is legal and binding. Dominic's jaw tightened. The source of those funds is under investigation. The injunction was denied yesterday, James said smoothly. Mrs. Rinder's inheritance is legitimate, and so are her purchases. Would you like to continue wasting time, or shall we proceed? Gerald Fisk whispered something to Dominic, who nodded stiffly. Fine. You have controlling interest. What do you want, Catherine? I want several things. First, I want answers about my husband's death. Second, I want a full financial audit of every transaction made since Julian died. Third, I want Dominic removed as CEO effective immediately. You can't just remove me. I can and I am. Board members, you should know that Dominic has been under investigation by my legal team for the past 6 months. We've found evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and corporate misconduct. I nodded to James, who distributed another set of documents. These records show that Dominic moved company funds into personal accounts, falsified financial reports to hide losses from his luxury development division, and used Julian's profitable community programs as cover for his failures. Susan Crawford flipped through the pages, her expression darkening. These numbers, if this is accurate, you've stolen over $8 million from the company. Those are lies, Dominic said, but his voice lacked conviction. Manipulated records from a bitter widow with an agenda. They're backed by bank records, wire transfers, and testimony from your own accountants, James said. We have 3 employees willing to testify that you ordered them to move money and hide the transactions. Another board member, Robert Kim, looked up. Is this true, Dominic? I made strategic decisions to keep the company solvent. Julian's bleeding heart projects were costing us millions. Julian's division was profitable, I said. Every program he ran generated positive returns through community investment and tax incentives. Your luxury developments lost money. You used his success to hide your failures, and when he refused to let you sell the company, you had him killed. The room went silent. That's a serious accusation, Susan said quietly. It's also true. I pulled out my phone and played Patricia's recording. Her voice filled the room. I loved Julian. We all did. But he was weak. He let his emotions cloud his judgment. He was going to run the company into the ground with his charity projects and idealistic nonsense. We did what we had to do to protect the family legacy. The board members sat frozen. That's my mother-in-law confessing to conspiracy to murder my husband, I said. She's currently in police custody. So is Vanessa Kong Rinder, who purchased the drug that killed Julian and was captured on hotel security footage entering his hotel the night he died. Gerald Fisk stood up. This meeting is over. We're not discussing alleged criminal matters in a corporate setting. Sit down, Gerald, Susan snapped. Or you're fired. We're listening to everything Mrs. Rinder has to say. I looked at Dominic. He'd gone pale, his hands shaking slightly. You knew, I said. Maybe you didn't poison Julian yourself, but you knew what Vanessa and your mother were planning. The emails prove it. James distributed more documents. 3 days before Julian Rinder's death, Dominic Rinder sent this email to Marcus Yates of Meridian Capital. The Julian problem will be resolved soon. Be ready to move forward with acquisition discussions. 2 days after Julian's death, they had a phone call lasting 47 minutes. Robert Kim looked sick. You planned to sell the company before your brother was even buried? Julian was standing in the way of a $50 million sale, I said. He refused to liquidate the community programs or agree to the acquisition. So they removed him. And then they came after me to make sure I couldn't interfere. I pulled out the prenuptial agreement. They told me this was medical paperwork. Julian apologized for the boring legal forms and asked me to sign. I trusted my husband, so I did. I had no idea I was signing away my rights to his estate. Susan examined the document. This is fraud. If you can prove you signed under false pretenses. I have Julian's letter describing how his family was pressuring him to get me to sign a prenup. How he felt guilty about it, but did it to protect the company. He never meant for it to be used to strip me of everything after his death. I distributed copies of Julian's letter, watching as the board members read his words. They locked me out of my own home 3 days after the funeral, I continued. Froze all accounts. Offered me $250,000 to disappear and threatened to destroy me if I fought back. They called me a gold digger, a non-factor, someone too stupid to understand business. My voice hardened. But I understood everything. I understood that they murdered Julian to steal his company. That they embezzled millions. That they destroyed every good thing he built. And I spent 6 months gathering evidence to prove it. I turned to Dominic. You asked me who won. Remember? You stood outside the community center and told me I was living on my friend's couch while you controlled a $50 million company. You asked me who won. He said nothing. I won. I have more money than your entire family combined. I have evidence that will send your mother and wife to prison for murder. I have documentation of your fraud. And I have control of the company you killed your brother to steal. Robert Kim spoke first. I move for an immediate vote to remove Dominic Rinder as CEO and install Catherine Rinder as interim CEO pending a full investigation. Seconded, Susan said immediately. All in favor? 5 hands went up. The independent board members had voted unanimously. Dominic's loyalists sat silent, trapped. Motion carries, Susan declared. Dominic, you're removed effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You can't do this. We just did, Robert said. And frankly, if half of what Mrs. Rinder has presented is true, you're lucky we're not having you arrested right now. Security guards I'd hired appeared at the door. Dominic looked at them, then at me. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. Your mother and Vanessa are facing murder charges. You're facing embezzlement and fraud charges. The DA will be filing them this afternoon. Your company is gone. Your reputation is destroyed. It's over, Dominic. You lost. They escorted him out. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Mrs. Rinder, Susan said carefully, what are your plans for the company? I'm reinstating every program Julian created. Every community center, every youth initiative, every scholarship fund. I'm hiring back everyone who was fired for being loyal to Julian. And I'm conducting a complete financial audit to find every dollar that was stolen. That's going to be expensive, Robert said. I have $218 million in personal funds. I can afford it. And the acquisition offer from Meridian Capital? Rejected. This company isn't for sale. It's going to do exactly what Julian wanted, make money while making a difference. And if the profit margins aren't high enough for you, I'll buy out your shares personally. I want board members who believe in the mission, not just the money. Susan smiled. I think I speak for most of us when I say we're willing to give your vision a chance. Julian was a good man. His brother was destroying everything he built. It's time someone honored his legacy properly. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. We discussed financials, restructuring, legal strategies. By the end, I had full board support and a clear path forward. When I finally left the building, reporters were waiting. Mrs. Rinder, can you confirm you're now CEO of Rinder Holdings? Yes. What's your message to the family that tried to destroy you? I looked directly at the camera. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth. Julian Rinder was a good man who was murdered by people who valued money more than family. I'm going to make sure his legacy lives on through the work he started. And I'm going to make sure the people who killed him face the consequences of their actions. What about Dominic Rinder? Dominic is facing multiple criminal charges. He's no longer involved with the company. That's all I'll say about him. I walked to my car, not Julian's old sedan anymore, but a new one I'd bought the week before. Modest, practical, nothing flashy. As I drove away, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello, Catherine Rinder? A young woman's voice shaking. My name is Melissa Rinder. I'm Vanessa's daughter. I'm 16. My heart clenched. Melissa, I'm so sorry about everything. Don't be. My mom. I heard things. Conversations she had with grandmother about Uncle Julian. I didn't understand then, but I do now. She paused. I wanted you to know that not everyone in this family is like them. And I'm glad you're fighting back. Thank you for telling me that. Will you really bring back Uncle Julian's programs? The community centers? Every single one. Good. He used to take me to visit them sometimes. He said helping people was the whole point of having money. I miss him. So do I. After she hung up, I sat in my car and cried. Not tears of victory or grief, but something in between. I'd won. But the cost had been enormous. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Rebuilding the company, honoring Julian's memory, facing the trials. But tonight, I let myself feel everything. The pain and the triumph. The loss and the justice. And I knew that Julian would be proud. 6 months later, I stood in the refurbished community center where I'd first met Julian. The place had been shut down after his death, the building sold to developers. I'd bought it back for 3 times what they paid, renovated it completely, and today was the reopening. Families filled the space. Kids ran through hallways painted in bright colors. Elderly residents sat in the new reading room. The gymnasium echoed with basketball games and laughter. Julian would have loved this, Marissa said, standing beside me. I know. I touched the necklace I still wore every day. This is what he wanted. What he died trying to protect. The trials had been brutal but swift. Vanessa was convicted of first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The drug purchases, the hotel footage, her financial motive, Patricia's recorded confession. She was sentenced to life without parole. Patricia took a plea deal to avoid trial. 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. At 70 years old, she'd likely die in prison. Dominic faced federal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud. His trial was still pending, but his lawyers were already negotiating a plea. He was looking at 10 to 15 years. The company I'd renamed Rinder Legacy Holdings was thriving. We'd restructured completely. The luxury developments that had been hemorrhaging money were sold off. The community investment programs were expanded. And somehow, impossibly, we were more profitable than ever. Turns out people wanted to invest in companies that actually helped communities. Our stock price had doubled in 6 months. I'd hired a real CEO, someone with experience who believed in Julian's vision. I stayed on as board chair, but I wasn't trying to run everything myself. I'd learned that lesson quickly. My days were split between corporate oversight and hands-on community work. I'd never stopped being a social worker at heart. The money just meant I could do it on a scale Julian had dreamed about. Speech time, Marissa reminded me. I walked to the small stage we'd set up. Faces turned toward me, some I recognized from years ago, some new. 8 months ago, I stood in front of cameras and told the world that my husband had been murdered. That his family had stolen everything we built together. That I was going to fight for justice. The room was silent. Today, I'm standing here to tell you that justice happened. The people who killed Julian are in prison. The company he loved is honoring his legacy. And the communities he cared about are getting the support he always wanted to provide. I paused, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. But justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration. Julian believed that people deserved dignity, opportunity, and hope. He believed that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. And he showed me that the measure of a person isn't what they have, it's what they do with it. I gestured around the room. This center represents everything Julian stood for. Education programs for kids, job training for adults, healthcare access, mental health services. All of it free, all of it available, all of it designed to lift people up. We're opening 12 more centers like this across the city over the next year. We're funding scholarships, small business grants, affordable housing initiatives. We're doing what Julian would have done if he'd lived. My voice cracked. I can't bring him back. But I can make sure his vision lives on. And I can make sure that the people who tried to destroy that vision lost everything while his legacy grows. The applause was thunderous. After the speeches, I spent hours just talking with people, hearing their stories, learning about their needs, making notes about programs we could create. An elderly woman named Grace approached me near the end of the day. "You don't remember me," she said, "but I was here when you and Julian first met. I saw how he looked at you. Like you were the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life." "I remember you," I said softly. "You played chess with him." She smiled. "He told me once that loving you made him want to be worthy of you. That you reminded him what mattered. He'd be so proud of what you've done." After she walked away, I found a quiet corner and let myself cry. Not the desperate, broken tears of early grief, but something gentler. Bittersweet. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa, Vanessa's daughter. "Saw the news about the community center. Uncle Julian is smiling somewhere. Thank you for not giving up." I'd stayed in touch with her. She was living with her father now, dealing with the reality of having a mother in prison for murder. It wasn't fair to her, but I tried to be someone she could talk to. Not everyone in the Rinder family was broken. Some were just collateral damage. That evening, I drove to Julian's grave. I'd made it a habit to visit every week. To talk to him, update him, ask him questions I'd never get answers to. "We did it," I said, sitting on the grass beside his headstone. "The company is thriving. The programs are back. The people who killed you are in prison. Everything you wanted to build, it's happening." The sunset painted the cemetery in gold and purple light. I'm okay now. It took a long time, but I'm okay. I still miss you every single day. I still wish you were here to see what we've built. But I'm not drowning anymore. I'm living. I touched his headstone. "Thank you for the necklace. For the letter. For loving me enough to try to protect me even after you were gone. You said I'd know when I needed the inheritance, and you were right. Richard Ashford's gift saved me. But your love gave me the strength to use it." I stood up, wiping my eyes. "I'm going to keep fighting for what you believed in. I'm going to make sure your legacy changes lives. And someday, when my time comes, I hope I've made you proud." The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I could almost feel Julian beside me. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at a business conference about ethical investing and community-focused corporations. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I'd been sleeping on my friend's couch. Now I was advising Fortune 500 companies on corporate responsibility. After my speech, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 25, nervous, clutching a folder. "Mrs. Rinder, my name is Amy. My mom worked at one of the community centers your husband funded. When it closed after he died, she lost her job. She struggled for months. But last week, you reopened the center and hired her back. I'm glad we could help. You did more than help. You gave her hope again. And I wanted to tell you. I'm in law school now. I want to do what you did, fight for people who can't fight for themselves. You inspired me." After she left, I sat in the hotel lobby and thought about ripple effects. Julian had helped one woman, who raised a daughter, who is now going to help countless others. That was legacy. Not money or buildings or companies. People helping people, creating waves that spread farther than you could ever see. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. Started writing thoughts for a foundation I wanted to create. The Julian Rinder Foundation for Community Investment. It would fund programs, train leaders, support grassroots organizations. It would be everything Julian had wanted to do but never got the chance. My assistant called. You have a meeting with the governor next week about the Affordable Housing Initiative. Confirmed. What else? 3 interview requests, 2 board meetings, and someone from the State Department asking if you'd join a task force on corporate ethics. I laughed. A year ago I couldn't pay my rent. Now the State Department wants my advice. You're Catherine Rinder. You took down a corrupt family dynasty and turned their company into a force for good. People pay attention to that. That night, alone in my apartment, a real apartment now, spacious and comfortable, but not ostentatious, I reflected on everything. I'd started this journey as a 27-year-old widow with nothing. I'd been betrayed, robbed, mocked, and underestimated. But I'd survived. More than that, I'd won. Not just the legal battles or the money. I'd won something more important, the chance to honor Julian's memory in a way that actually mattered. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a business plan or legal document, but a letter. To anyone who's ever been told they're too small to matter, too weak to fight back, too broken to rebuild. I was you. I lost everything. I was dismissed, underestimated, and nearly destroyed by people with more power and resources than I could imagine. But I learned something important. Your worth isn't determined by what people take from you. It's determined by what you do when you have nothing left to lose. I fought back not because I was brave, but because staying silent felt like dying. I won not because I was smart, but because I refused to quit. If you're in that dark place right now, broke, alone, grieving, lost, I want you to know, this isn't your ending. It's your beginning. The person you become through this pain will be stronger than you can imagine. Hold on. Fight back. And when you win, use your victory to help someone else who's where you were. That's how we change the world. One battle, one person, one act of courage at a time. With love and solidarity. Catherine Rinder. I posted it on social media and went to bed. By morning, it had been shared 50,000 times. My inbox flooded with messages from people sharing their own stories of loss and survival. Of fighting back against impossible odds. Of finding strength they didn't know they had. I read every single one. And I realized that this was my purpose now. Not just running a company or managing wealth, but showing people that transformation was possible. That victims could become victors. That the people who tried to destroy you didn't get the final word. You did. So let me ask you, wherever you're watching this from, have you ever felt powerless? Have you ever been told you were nothing, that you should accept your place and stop fighting? I hope my story shows you that those people are wrong. That your current circumstances don't define your future. That kindness isn't weakness and silence isn't surrender. The Rinder family thought they'd won when they took everything from me. They thought I was a non-factor, a problem they'd solved. They were wrong. And whoever's underestimating you right now, they're wrong too. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay down. And drop a comment telling me what battle you're fighting right now. I read them all and I'm cheering for you. 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, I hope you look back at this moment and realize it was the turning point. The moment you decided to fight back. Because you're stronger than you know. And your story isn't over yet. Thank you for listening to mine. This is Catherine Rinder, reminding you that justice isn't just about the courts or the law. It's about refusing to let the people who hurt you define who you become. Stay strong. Stay kind. And never, ever give up.